Effective May 28th, the US Federal Maritime Commission now requires that invoices for detention and demurrage charges be issued to the consignee or person who contracted for the cargo transportation or storage, also known as the billed parties. So during this session, our experts will review the impact of the ruling, consider the impacts and the next steps for your business. And then we'll host a question and answer session for a strategic discussion about the best-in-class ocean freight management practices that you can have in this new status quo. So I'd like to introduce Mike DeAngelis and Shana Ray. Mike DeAngelis is a Senior Director of International Solutions at FourKites, where he drives strategy and innovation around FourKites ocean, air, and rail solutions. He's a proven industry leader with over 27 years of experience, gained at major ocean carriers, as well as a number of leading transportation software and solutions providers. Shana Ray is a principal solutions consultant with FourKites and an expert in helping clients develop best-in-class strategies and operations for their supply chain. Shana has 25 years of operations and consulting experience with companies of all sizes in a broad range of industry segments, including consumer goods and retail, industrial manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing, airline parts and materials, automotive, service parts logistics, food and beverage, and healthcare around the world. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Mike DeAngelis to get us started.
Thank you, Corey. I just wanted to start by level setting and making sure that we're all on the same page regarding some basic terminology. So detention and demurrage, these are, the charges that can be applicable when you've exceeded your free time, which is a set period of time. That period of time can depend on the location, facility, that can depend on your contractual relationship with the carrier, and can even be influenced by the equipment size and type. To define detention, these are charges that could be applicable when you have the container outside of the port and terminal area, and demurrage would be applicable if you still have the container inside the port terminal area. So an example would be if for, say, detention, the full container has been picked up from the port terminal, but has not yet been returned empty to the correct location, be that a depot, be that a container yard, whereas demurrage is that the container is now available full for pickup, but has not been picked up before the last free day. So just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page before we moved on. These can apply both on the export side and on the import side. For the sake of today's discussion, I think we'll just limit it to the sort of the import flow, but just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware it can actually apply on both sides. So what has changed? We can look at what's changed the 28th of May, but actually if we take one step further back, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 had resulted from a number of complaints, a number of issues, mainly coming out of the pandemic, where containers are really getting stuck at port terminal facilities, be that driver chassis shortages, be that facilities closed, be that low staffing. So at that point in time, the federal government had come in, lawmakers had come in and sort of clarified what does the invoice need to contain as a major part of that legislation. And then since then, additional pieces have been clarified. So what went into effect from the FMC on the 20th of May regarding detention and demurrage invoicing would be which parties can be billed. And in Corey's intro, what he had gone over is the fact that it is the one that has the contractual relationship with the carrier, or the consignee being the ultimate recipient of the cargo, but cannot be both at the same. The applicable timeframes will also depend on who is billing or being billed, but generally speaking, you're talking about within 30 calendar days of the last event for that particular billing, be that detention or demurrage. Then what you would have is your ability to then, as the recipient, as the billed party, say you have 30 days from the issuance of that invoice to then either dispute it, to have it clarified with the billing party. And then the billing party from that point has 30, and these are all calendar days, 30 calendar days to be able to then come back with a resolution. Unless, of course, both the billed party and the billing party come up with an agreeable separate time frame. So really, those are the three elements here: which parties can be billed, the applicable timeframes for the invoicing itself, and then the process in case there's any clarification or dispute that needs to be managed. On this basis, what should you do? Right, now you're a billed party, so now you're either the consignee or the one that has the contractual relationship with the carrier. I think really the first and foremost, you need to understand what is the free time, what are your last free days, and again, as I stated before, that can vary depending on location, depending on your contractual relationship and terms, depending on equipment type. So really, it's getting a good understanding of your container flows and where your containers will be flowing through and what the applicable free time and last free days for those facilities and container types will be. At a broader level, having a line of sight to your inbound containers. So really not relying on arrival notices, not relying on manual, methods for tracking containers, be that spreadsheets, be that carrier websites. You really want to start to avoid relying on something that's manual, especially when there are potential charges involved. And then understanding how can you manage your current costs, because I think that's first and foremost, is trying in real time, trying to determine, am I going to incur any charges with this particular container or shipment? And then as we become, more savvy, we can apply that towards, well, looking back, what can we do differently to help avoid future costs? So how can FourKites help you manage your detention and demurrage charges? Well, I think that this is not an exhaustive list. These are some essential elements that we've come up with, which is really understanding, has your container discharged? Is that container now available for pickup? If it hasn't been picked up yet, is it at risk of demurrage charges? If it's already been taken out of the port or terminal facility, but not returned empty yet, that's also an essential piece of information. And the purpose of these first four are really to have the data to be able to have proactive conversations with your supply chain partners, be that a carrier, be that a trucking provider, be that the actual port and terminal itself, setting appointments to have containers picked up. So really having this information arms you as the build party to be able to be a bit proactive. And as I sort of alluded to in the previous slide, you can then take the additional step of looking at historic data and starting to determine, how can I avoid future costs? Do I need to speak to my providers? Do I need to consider a new provider? Do I need to consider a different location because there's congestion, because there are issues? So really having that data allows you now to be able to make changes to help minimize your chances of having future charges. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Shana to go a little deeper into how FourKites can help you with your detention and demurrage charges.
Hello, thanks, Mike. Well, so how we control detention demurrage, getting a little bit more tactical, is that first we start with, we can actually apply the steamship line or the MVOCC contracts and upload then those into our platform. What this allows us to do is to, have your contract terms in the platform so that we have all of those different accessorial charges, the detention demurrage, and we can actually surface that in the platform. Now, that is easy for users to come in and say, usually if you're just looking at containers, you're like, oh, there's a certain number of containers that are impacted, but being able to see that dollar amount and what that cost is to your organization is very valuable in the process. So, we also have other dashboards that highlight exceptions like rolled bookings and, transshipment port changes, but we also want to highlight anything that is incurring detention demurrage around the world or approaching detention and demurrage so that you can be proactive. Another source of data that we bring in is we do have port terminal integrations where we will pull in the last free day. As many people know, if you're coming into Long Beach and you have contracts with your steamship line or your BOCC, that port terminal last free day is going to be different than your contractual agreement with your steamship lines. So being able to keep that in the information, keep information in the platform where users are informed at every level across all containers and all ports. We can also do custom alerts for you, your team, or even your customers. So this also helps you streamline your pickup and drop-offs. You'll be able to see, anything that's been outgated that hasn't been returned that could be incurring detention. And we have many filters and other identifiers to help users and customers and internal facilities identify these shipments. So that was kind of our first piece. So we have many dashboards or exceptions that kind of show what's happening live in the platform. But once we also have insights, and once something has been, once a shipment has been completed from port of loading to port of discharge, we do have insights and analytics where we actually pull in, all that detention and demurrage. What are the trends between the steamship line? If you have MBOCC contracts that we've uploaded and you want to look at specific lanes, this gives you a leverage of historical detention and demurrage to really reduce transportation costs and other fees. One of our existing customers actually comes in through the port of Savannah quite frequently. Most of the containers coming in through the port of Savannah were on-time performance was poor, transit times weren't exactly where they wanted to be, and they were getting detention and demurrage charges up in the millions. They actually took our reports and made a decision to move one of their ports a little bit farther north. They had a little bit more expense on dray or intermodal moves, but they were able to reduce their detention and demurrage dramatically, improve on-time performance, and keep in line with their transit time agreements. So we've definitely put this into practice with real customers. Lots of data and detention demurrage that is useful for our customers to really look at those lanes and make informed decisions. Even being able to look down at the carrier level. So if you have multiple carriers using the same lane, what's the performance there? What are the differences between the different carriers or steamship line or MBOCCs? So lots of information in our insights. And like I said, that's once something's been delivered, we analyze everything that's happened end to end on that shipment. So I think we'll probably turn it over to the question section now. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. We have an opportunity here for some open discussion with our experts. If you have any questions about what you've seen on the slides, if you're interested in going into further detail around the impact of this legislation, the context for it, please feel free to add that into the question section now. I'll be happy to relay that. Also, Shana is obviously available to go into deeper detail around any of the capabilities you would have just seen. The first question that we have, this question is for Mike. Do we expect to see further regulations related to detention and demurrage in the future, or is this something that's more definitive?
It's a good question. I do not expect that this is going to be the last regulation regarding detention and demurrage invoicing. I think, at least from the US standpoint, this is sort of a work in progress. There have been amendments already that have been introduced. You had the regulation here clarifying the build parties and the timeframes, but I would expect, as this happens in real practice, in real life, that it then gets tweaked. So I would expect you probably would see some amendments based on learnings or based on any sort of complexities that may arise from the regulation coming into effect.
I know that we have one question that came in from Peter. This question is around the OSEMA petition for a 3-month suspension of the D&D rule and the FMC notice of intent. Will we be covering these in addition to the WSC federal lawsuit against the FMC and this rule?
So yeah, this is getting in a little in depth. I know there's a time frame that the FMC is collecting feedback, so I won't speculate as to how that's going to happen, but this is exactly what I do believe will happen, is that different parts of the industry are going to question whether or not we're ready for a regulation to come in this particular case. But the feedback I've seen and was just reported, by a major publication was, that at least in the limited feedback they had gotten, that the regulation that went into effect on May 28th actually is helping, say, the drayage providers. So that was a positive signal. But as to whether or not that's indicative of the experience across the board, whether or not we're going to see any of this, potentially postponed, I think, it's too early for us, from where we sit, to make that determination.
Excellent. We have another question that came. I understand there are now 13 required data elements for detention and demurrage invoices. What are those?
If we're talking about the data elements that came into effect because of OSRA 2022, so the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, we can go through these. I guess it's good, because we do have the time. So it's the date containers made available, the port of discharge, the container number or numbers, for export shipments, the earliest return date, the allowed free time in days, the start date of free time, the end date of free time, the applicable detention or demurrage rule on which the daily rate is based, the applicable rate or rates per the applicable rule, the total amount due, contact info, so email, telephone number, and appropriate contact information for questions or requests for mitigation of fees. And then we saw in the regulation that just came in a bit about the timing, the 30 calendar days, a statement that the charges are consistent with any of the FMC rules with respect to detention and demurrage, and then a statement that the common carrier's performance did not cause or contribute to the underlying invoice charges.
Excellent.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so just want to thank everyone for joining us in this conversation. Hope that you found this useful. And if you're interested in discussing further, please feel free to reach out to us at sales@fourkites.com. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.